Now, when it comes, there's another topic that is a big one that people are very interested in, and I think it's a space where there's a need for effective advice on this. How do you remove unwanted manifestations?
So, unwanted manifestations really come from a core belief and one that is sometimes incredibly painful to look at. So, sometimes you have to do a bit of digging and really reflect, where does this belief come from? For example, if you have somebody in your life who is incredibly volatile and very much bullies you, maybe there's a core belief that you are not worthy of being treated with dignity and respect. Um, and you have to sometimes dig a little into those beliefs and find out, not necessarily where they came from, possibly, but how do you go ahead and best, in a caring, nurturing, and loving way, release those negative beliefs and replace them with something factual, which is you are beautiful, loving, and deserving of love. And so being able to go ahead and take the time to look at that sometimes can be really scary. But ultimately, you have to learn that not all feelings are factual. Sometimes they are just left over from instances or events that happened in a traumatic time in your life that no longer represent who you are. And so, if you have these negative issues just organically repeating themselves, you have to be able to go ahead and carve some time for you and to be able to go ahead and instill new beliefs and new thought patterns and a new mental diet, that you have a beautiful life, that everything wonderfully works out for you, and that you feel love and abundant and all these things that you want in your life. And so sometimes you will have to find that you have to make a physical transition. Other times, I know when I've had a difficult person in my life, I thought about, how do I get this person to just leave? And I remember a long time ago watching this Amy Westmoreland video, and she was talking about how she wanted to be the good guy in this really bad situation. And to give a little bit more context, she was supposed to go visit a friend on what was her birthday. But the friend had just gotten a breakup and was in a really bad mood and couldn't stop talking about her ex. And it was just like, oh, I don't want to be around that on my birthday. Not to say that she didn't want to be there for her friend, but it was her birthday and she wanted to have a happy, joyful experience for her birthday. And so Amy said, how do I go ahead and um, be the good guy in the situation? And so she imagined her friend giving her a call and, telling her, I'm so sorry. I know we had plans, but I'm going to have to cancel our plans. And Amy talks about how she visualized it and she impressed it and she kind of forgot about it. And then the next day, without planning, the phone rings, and sure enough, it's her friend. And her friend tells her, oh, I'm so sorry. I know we had plans. I know it's your birthday, but I just feel awful and I'm canceling. And Amy was like, oh no, it's okay. It's okay. Don't worry about it. And so I remember having a very similar situation where I had this colleague who was driving me insane. And I was just like, why are you so negative? And why are you always raining on my parade? And we're having a lot of really, you know, a lot of conflict at work. And so I decided to take Amy's technique and then I applied it to this colleague quitting her job and then calling to tell me about it. And I did it. And sure enough, something like 2, 3 weeks went by. It wasn't long at all. And this colleague calls me and she was just like, Daphne, I'm so sorry, but I just can't take it anymore. I'm really having a hard time with my family and work. I've decided that I'm just going to have to move on. And I know this means more work for you. And I have to go ahead and do that. And so I said, oh my gosh, like internally I was jumping, and I said, I completely understand. I'm so sorry. And I hung up the phone, and I was just like, oh my goodness, I can't believe it worked. It worked. Like that manifestation worked, and she was out of my life. And it was just overwhelming relief. And, you know, in that particular instance, that's how I dealt with a very difficult situation in that immediacy. But in the longer, bigger picture of things, now that I've learned more and I've experienced more, I have learned that it does come back to those core beliefs. And so if those things, negative people keep on coming back into your life, it is tethered to some sort of core belief that you have in regards to how people show up in your life, or how certain series of events show up in your life, and how you're able to go ahead and react to them.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just as simple as assuming the possibility that these people could be in your life. Not necessarily that that's the overall arc, but just thinking, oh, well, there's bad people out there and I might encounter them. It's more than enough to manifest encountering them. I mean, one thing I know that I've encountered when it comes to moderating for Twitch channels is like, well, I assume there's trolls. So am I really surprised when they are in the channel? Now, for the most part, they're not, but I'm aware that they could be out there. So they do occasionally show up, but it's not a big deal when they do. Now, one bit of context that you did leave out that I do know is that you also tried manifesting behavior changes in her and just generally seeing her in a better state, but that there kept being a back and forth, back and forth. And so that's why you ended up manifesting her away, right?
Yeah. Um, I mean, for whatever reason, I had tried to work things out. Mind you, this was many years ago, and at the time I didn't have as an in-depth knowledge of the law as I do now. Um, but I had tried to really unsuccessfully change her habits. And I think a lot of that had to do is that didn't really have an understanding of the divinity of God within. Um, and then, years later, not too long ago, I had somewhat of a similar incident with somebody else, but things sometimes negatively organically show up in your life, but it didn't impact me anywhere near the same way. Um, and I very much remember um, having this conversation with this angry individual who luckily I don't work with on a regular basis. Um, and she was very negative. And I remember thinking, I understand that this is, a negative situation, but ultimately God is within every single individual, and that perfection, that divinity, that love. And I just remember feeling so in love with this person and everyone in that room, in that meeting, um, because it's a very different perspective. And so much of what happens in the 3D is just on autopilot, and sometimes comes back and is chaotic, as this world is meant to be chaotic, as the experience is meant to be chaotic. But once you kind of understand that, and understand how, yes, these are things that happen, but ultimately they do not define the bigger picture or myself, it's very different. And um, I don't, people can't get to you in that way anymore. And ultimately, I still kind of now have that bigger core belief that everything works out to me for me. And ultimately, it has, and it did, and even in this particular case. Um, so that's an experience that I had a long time ago. And even then, right, I was able to manifest her departure, which at the time was a big success. But felt like a big success, but it's just an experience, just as this was an experience. And, you know, how individuals show up absolutely is tethered to that core belief. And Neville talks so many instances and different stories of how people were able to change individuals, um, just by finally truly falling in love with them and falling in love with their true being and their true nature, which is God.
Yeah, Joseph Murphy talks about it's the absolutist method, but you can apply it to people. And what you do is you do your best to see the divine image of the person, and that's literally all you do. You don't but you do it while you're really relaxed. So you don't necessarily have a scene of them. They don't have to say anything. They don't have to do anything. They don't. You don't even have to have an awareness in the scene that you're there with them. You just do your like you would start out by thinking about all the divine aspects of God and like the loftiest versions of them, and then pulling this person's image to your mind and applying all of that specific feelings, like all of those specific states, you would see the person in that light, and that's it. That's all you would do. You don't have. They don't have to talk to you. You don't have to talk to them in the scene. You just do your best to see the divine alive in them. And he had some stories of people manifesting, like, arguments that had been going on for like 20 years, being dissolved by someone doing that just a handful of times. Um, but so that's sort of the person aspect of it. I will say that I notice when it comes to unwanted money ones, a lot of times it's very obvious that the person just hasn't adjusted their self concept. Like if they're getting unwanted bills, and like they're in a lot of debt they can't seem to get rid of, they just have a bunch of beliefs about money being hard to come by, always being behind, never having enough. They just have a lack mindset when it comes to money. So like specific removal of unwanted in a lot of cases is not even necessary. Like adjusting those major beliefs will have that shift automatically. But sometimes if the person just manifested on that little thing, that can like break through a bunch of major beliefs for them. So like if they get an unwanted bill and manifest it away, or manifest it being, sort of miraculously paid, that can open them up to like, oh wow, like money doesn't have to be this hard suffering road for me. Like it can just be easy for me, right?
Absolutely. I mean, everything is tethered to beliefs, but you have to also remember that everything is an illusion. And the only thing that really exists is the perfection that is God. And Neville describes God so perfectly by saying that in his perfection, he has to do nothing. All he has to do is be, and everything around him is perfect. Um, when I think of the overwhelming abundance that is God and that you have in your imagination, you have to know that that is the truth. Scarcity has and always will be a lie. There is no such thing as not enough. There's always more than enough. And we see that by the overwhelming abundance that we witness every single day across the world, in our cities, in our communities, where everything and everyone really is you pushed out, and that includes all of the money. And I think when we think of even the reality as we see it now, we think of the sun, and the truth is, we think of this magnitude of the sun and the sky and the sea, and the reality is that God has created an infinite number of parallel universes, an infinite number of, worlds for us to go ahead and call into existence what we desire to experience. And how can you go ahead and put a price on the sun? How much would you pay for the sun? How much would you pay for all of the natural beauty that we have, the abundance when it comes to the harvest that happens every single year? It's just a magnitude sometimes beyond imagination. And when I realized that the sun, right, the sun exists for your pure joy and pleasure, to feel its warmth, um, And it is yours. It is your creation. It is you pushed out as the stars, as the sea, as the skyscrapers. It makes everything else so minuscule because God doesn't strain or stress for money. Neville always said to spend money like you have money being a dry leaf and you are the owner of a forest. And that is true because at the end of the day, money is just paper. And the only concept of worth that we have to money is that you have attached to it. So when you're fearing that you don't have enough, it's just that it's a fear and it's an illusion. But ultimately, everything is already in creation. There's already a version of you that's a multimillionaire. There's a version of you that's a billionaire. There's a version of you that has so much overwhelming abundance, and that looks different for everyone. For me, it's not about the desire of being a billionaire because even then, it's just a shadow. And I think Neville articulated this so beautifully in the pursuit of his family and how they built their wealth. And in Neville's lifetime, they were all multimillionaires in the 1960s. It was quite an accomplishment. And so understanding that desire is there and that desire can be met, and that desire can be met in many different ways, whether it is building a business from nothing and then making it a multi-million dollar business, to winning the lottery, to having an inheritance. It can come to you a vast variety of ways. The result is always going to the end and finding that joy, because unlike what so many people think, it's not about the destination. It has always been about the journey of the pursuit and the joy of being able to go ahead and find how you finally were able to reach that feeling of abundance. But know that you yourself are abundant and everything in you is the universe. So there should never be a doubt in your mind that you are able to have everything you desire financially.
And one of the things that I was reminded of while you're talking about this is there's a Neville quote. I'm not going to quote it exactly, but it's roughly that you can tell the state you're in if you've had just a little change of mind or a true change of expression based on your reactions. So if we're talking about money, like if you have consciously moved into a state of being wealthy and you get an unexpected bill, well, are you freaking out or are you like, I got a ton of money. Like, I don't really need to worry about this. And that and your reaction to it can tell you a lot about what state you're in. Similarly, when it comes to relationships, let's say it's a specific person situation, if you've moved into a state of, a confident, secure, loving commitment with this person, and you guys have a little argument or something, well, are you suddenly catastrophizing and thinking they're going to leave me again or something like that? Or you're like, no, this is just going to make our relationship stronger. This doesn't even matter. Maybe you revise it on the spot. Or you're like, yeah, this doesn't matter. They're going to be over this in like 5 minutes. And you can judge based on your reaction what state you're really in. Similarly, when it comes to like a bigger picture thing, if you've assumed that you're always treated with respect and somebody, let's say, cuts you off while you're driving or just on the street calls you an asshole for some sort of random reason, does that all of a sudden compromise the respect you've claimed for yourself? That everybody who's important in your life is reflecting back to you? No, but for some people who are in a certain really low state of not really believing in their integrity and worth, it might. They might start thinking like, oh my God, even this random stranger knows I'm an asshole or something like that. So you can always judge where you're at based on your reactions. And when you encounter an unwanted manifestation, do you feel like, oh, well, the law doesn't work. I don't know what I'm doing. I have no imaginal control. Things never work out for me. Or you're like, so what? Who cares? Like, everything always works out for me. I'm not even going to remember this tomorrow or next week or next month. Like, this doesn't even matter in like the big picture of my life. So I don't even have to worry about manifesting it away. It literally doesn't even matter. And, based on how you're approaching this and thinking about this, the state you're in, and the larger, deeper beliefs and assumptions within you that need to shift or not shift.
Yes, I mean, I think, like, it absolutely goes back to those core beliefs. And once you have them, you just see the world change around you. And you will see some things chaotically come up, but they're going to work out because you know who you are. Um, and you've seen them work out over and over and over and over and over again. And at this point, I've lost count of the successful manifestations that I've had, probably in the thousands, maybe more. Um, and you just build a resilience and a faith and an understanding that the ultimate truth is that all of this is an illusion and it's here for your pleasure and it's here for your experience. And, those things will come up, but it's important to stay positive. It's important to be able to know that things will work out for you ultimately. I think for me, what was difficult at the beginning was getting my staff to believe in positivity. They would sometimes have a lot of pessimism around certain projects that we would work on. And I would say, no, 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 always prepare for a favorable outcome. And I remember the first time I had told my staff, prepare for a favorable outcome. And then when the favorable outcome came, I received a phone call because I was out of the office. And, um, you know, uh, my staffer on the phone said, I didn't prepare for a favorable outcome. And I burst into laughter and I said, well, why not? And he answered, I didn't think it was possible. So everything I prepared was for the inevitability that we would lose. And I said, well, I told you we were going to win. And so this was a change of shift for my staff as well. And from now on, I always make sure they, and he in particular, prepare for a favorable outcome. And that was a lesson learned from them. That you have to kind of build up for that. You have to build up your mental diet. You have to build up the people around you. And, you have to keep at it. Sometimes you will have some people who speak negatively in front of you, but, at this point, it just doesn't bother me. I let it go far easier. And I know at the end of the day, it's going to work out for me in the way that I want to see it happen, in that victory chant that I want to see it happen. Because it's happened so many times. And it's just, it's such a beautiful existence. And being able to go ahead and do that has taken time. Obviously, it's nothing that happened overnight. And like I mentioned before, even believing that this was possible took me well over a year to even try to implement Neville's teachings. But once you do, it really is, it's very different. It's, Neville always, comes back to Galatians 4:22, I believe, where he, talks about Peter's letter to the Galatians, and in it he describes how the story of Abram is an allegorical story, and how Sarah is the wife that is born of the Spirit, and Agar is the slave. And in it, he goes on to tell how in this life, allegorically, the Bible talks about the two births. The first birth being that of the slave woman. And that is your first birth. That is the biological birth. And the second one being that of the Spirit, being one of Sarah. And once you have the second birth, that child inherits the universe. And so it's a very different existence. It's going from being a slave to being a free man. And so that is the best way that I can describe it. But mental diet and shifting those beliefs are at the core of seeing that change you desperately want in your life.
Yeah, and guys, what she was talking about there, for anyone that is new to the law, because this is something that this is a transition I went through as well, where you go through an unfolding, and something not just unwanted but totally contrary to your end pops up that your old self may see as jeopardizing the end. At first, I just would soothe myself through it, remind myself of my end, and then the ends would manifest. And now I'm at the point where I know when these things come up, even if I have an emotional reaction to them, that they're only coming up because I moved in imagination and because my end is guaranteed. That assumption in and of itself, that confidence, is something that just occurred organically, but it was a buildup of faith, and it was just the result of having so many manifestations where that would happen. And I'll be like, well, this has only happened because I'm going to get what I want. So I don't have to worry about this. I literally don't have to revise it or anything because I know it's only part of the unfolding. That wasn't there in the beginning. That is something I developed. And I know that's what you're talking about here, too. Um, Now, of course, you can assume that your unfoldings do go smooth and you don't encounter that anymore. And that is one of the assumptions that I've been interested in moving into. However, and my unfoldings altogether get way smoother. However, when those things do happen, they just don't bother me anymore. Or if I do have an emotional reaction, I know that, okay, well, here's a great, like, I really do feel this way now. Like, here is a great opportunity to let go of something that I don't even need to let go of because my end is guaranteed. But this came up so I could be like, hey, like, do you want to let go of this limiting belief or like this old really crappy emotion that you've held in your body for a long time? Because right now you could just like totally devote it and it'll never come up in another unfolding if you want to do that. You don't have to do that because you're still going to get what you want, but hey, you could do that, or sometimes it's there just to let you know that yes, you did update the belief, and so these little things that come up like have no influence over you anymore. You can just ignore them and let them be and let them die off. And I mean, if there's anything you wanted to add, go ahead, but we can move on to the next topic if you like.
Yeah, so I mean, I just would say that, looking back, particularly how so many things unraveled, it was so perfectly placed. At the very beginning, before I even ventured in all of this, a year before I even looked into Neville, I had stayed at the St. Francis Hotel. And it was just a very interesting stay. And for those of you who are followers of Neville Goddard, you will know that this is the same hotel in San Francisco where Neville had an awakening to the promise. And so looking back, when I saw how all of this had perfectly played out and came into my life in different timings, it seemed so divinely orchestrated. Um, and sometimes things will go ahead and play out in this fashion for the sheer experience of this life. And so I want you to know that sometimes, even in the midst of when it feels like it's all going wrong, it's still perfect in its own way. And it's still getting you to where you need to go. And ultimately, that is the true divine self of who you really are, who you've always been, and that you've never been in this whole mess alone, and that there is a much deeper knowing of happiness and love inside of you. And so I will add that to it because sometimes it's really hard to see in the moment until you've experienced that, until time has passed, and you're able to look back and say, I hadn't seen how perfectly the dots were connected then. I now clearly see that they always were.
So let's touch on two more topics, and then we'll wrap up for the night.